Deane. I'm here to talk I'm representing Campaign Against Climate Change, and I'm here to talk about big business. I was asked to speak about big business's involvement in global warming and attending climate change, and also to address issues concerning the COP21 conference in Paris and the march on November 29th. I think I'll start with something that was mentioned earlier, which is the big news story of the week, which is the VW scandal, and another huge event that occurred in relation to environment this week, which was possibly missed under the excitement of the VW episode, which is that Drax have pulled out of their involvement in the new coal power station called the White Rose, which we're building on site at Selby, which was going to be the largest coal power station in the UK. Drax is already the largest single emitter of carbon in the UK, and this would have increased that again. That's good news, but it comes with bad side issues. One is that what Drax have actually said is that they're going to leave the organisation of the White Rose coal power station to a consortium called Carbon Capture. Carbon Capture, I believe Drax have something like 20 to 30% interest in carbon capture, so they're not actually leaving the issue aside at all. But Drax are very, very clever and consistently playing a cat and mouse game with the government over the huge subsidies that they get. The newspapers are declaring that this is £1 billion of taxpayer subsidy that that they're turning their back on. They're claiming that the subsidies are not enough for what they're doing. But earlier on this year, they actually said that they were going to pull out of converting their coal turbines to burning wood. That's something that Drax have been doing. They've converted 2 turbines to wood. Each burns 3.5 million tonnes of imported wood a year. What they've said now is when they pull out of the coal power station, they're going to concentrate on converting 2 more turbines. They've got the go-ahead for a 3rd turbine, although they don't believe they've got enough finance for it. And they say they're going to convert a 4th turbine, which will bring the total up to about 15 million tonnes of imported wood coming from the southern states of the USA and British Columbia, to be incinerated in an instant, trees that have taken 40 years to grow and more. One of the things I'm worried about is that I will concentrate on too much of the negative aspects of what's going on, and lose out on time at the end to talk about some real positive issues in relation to environmental campaigning. But to go back to the Volkswagen thing, the 2 things that struck me were, and I'm sure the first one struck all of you, is that they talked about slumps in car sales. They talked about a crisis in manufacturing in Europe and financial markets in Europe, and the closest I've heard anybody come to discussing the climate implications of fraud in relation to emissions was the impact on public health of the particulate emissions, and no references to increases in greenhouse gases, which is a shame on our media industry. The second thing I heard this morning, which was very intriguing, was that somebody referred to the regulatory mechanisms that are in place for motor manufacturers. And it reflects something that goes across the board, and that is that it's essentially a self-regulating conditioning, self-monitoring and self-certification. And this is commonplace. While I'm speaking here on behalf of Campaign Against Climate Change, my principal activity is with the campaigning group called Biofuel Watch. I'm much more at ease talking about bioenergy than about the broader issues of climate change. It is a first for me to be actually stepping out of my comfort zone. But I can relate that to FSC certification, Forestry Stewardship Council, that little tick you see on your toilet rolls that they make such a fuss about in the television ads. Not many people know that FSC certification is actually another form of self-regulation. The plantation owners who supply the paper industry, they pay FSC for the certificate. They also appoint their own inspectors, and they arrange the times and the places and the length, the duration of the visit themselves. So it's in the interests of the appointed regulators to give a positive certification, because their wages are coming from the plantation owners themselves. So this appears to be what was going on in relation to admissions testing in the motor industry, and there'll be a lot more to be said about that. Incidentally, PSC self-certification is not sufficient for American timber and paper manufacturers, because they think it's too rigorous, and they want to introduce a system called chain of custody. Chain of custody will be that if the person passing the product along in the chain of supply guarantees positive certification for environmental sustainability standards, that is sufficient to release you from all other investigations. So along the chain of command, certification will be handed on, and the responsibility will be passed on and lost. So we're fighting that. Unfortunately, we're fighting that and defending the certification system that I've just absolutely torn apart. Talking about business capture of climate and climate issues, and the forthcoming Paris talks is very, very deep. We've got crises coming that may force a reconsideration of the appalling regulatory systems that we have, and one is going to be what's predicted to be the worst El Nino event in human experience, because of a massive warming in a system called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. It's a huge area of sea between Hawaii, California, and further up North America, that has been continually rising in temperature beyond all recordings that we have. This may force us, unfortunately, to strengthen regulation, and regulation is something that's going to be absolutely missing from the negotiations in Paris. Thank you. The EU has proudly announced last month that it's going to be introducing a system called INDC, Intended Nationally Determined Contributions. That means that every country can decide on its own contributions to emissions reductions. Like the regulatory bodies I've just described, the UNFCCC's role in this is to monitor. That means effectively standing on the sidelines and applauding anybody who does a reasonable job at reducing emissions, and they have no regulatory powers, they have no penal powers, it's a toothless position that they will occupy. Paris doesn't hold out much hope. James Hansen, you may know as the sort of godfather of climate science, from NASA, a NASA scientist turned activist. Last month, he said that there is hope. He's stressing that there is hope. And what he said was that we are much more reliant for this hope on things like the bilateral accords between USA and China than on anything that can be done within a broader collaboration between the parties at Paris. You know, that is hopeful, especially as China is in need now of viable exports. and solar panels and investment in wind turbines and wind technology may provide them with that, which would be a positive outcome. The Paris is going to be concentrating on, the draft document is going to be concentrating on market-oriented solutions to the climate crisis, market-oriented solutions such as carbon cap and trading, RED, that's reduced emissions from deforestation and denigration. RED is already largely discredited across the world, so they a couple of years ago refined it as a system called RED Plus. And one of the major provisions that they introduced in RED Plus was that they were asked to define a forest. And they defined a forest as any area where plants grow more than 1 metre tall, which includes cotton. A cotton field can be called a forest. But they bless them, they are trying. BECCS is another favoured solution, which is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture and storage was the great promise of clean coal that Drax were supposed to be delivering, and they've now pulled out of. Drax actually represented the last attempt to do carbon capture and storage in the real world. In the USA, the government's pulled out all financing for it last year, and before that, Vattenfall and I'm not sure who else, but other companies that were investing in it said that they were no longer going to invest in the research because it has not been shown to be viable by the tests that they've done so far. So they still insist that bioenergy is useful with carbon capture and storage. And one of the great egregious inclusions in Paris, the Paris draft documents, is that bioenergy is classified as renewable. Biofuel Watch, my main campaigning organisation, is vociferous, and we believe we're making breakthroughs in proving that bioenergy is far from carbon neutral. The White House recently made a statement affirming that. President Bush himself in a statement said that we cannot call bioethanol a carbon neutral fuel. That is a big step forward. How am I doing for time?
Got to wind up, I'm afraid.
Oh dear.
I'm sure we'll be able to pick up
I had some
questions.
beautiful quotes that I wanted to include. I'll give you one. This comes from George Bernard Shaw. He wrote a letter to the Times in 1948, and he was much disgusted because what he said was in relation to a submission he made to the government in 1928. Sorry, this was 1947, not 1948. In his letter, Shaw said, "But they went on grubbing for power in coal mines, and now that the atomic bomb has wakened them, they are dreaming of nuclear energies which are frightfully dangerous and enormously expensive. They do not seem to know that our tides are almost unique in the world." And he was talking about in 1928 putting a tidal capture energy system in the Kyle of Tongue in northern Scotland. And in 1928 he proposed this to the government. In 1948 he lamented that they went for nuclear instead of proper sustainable energy. And sadly it was another 20 years before the first ever tidal system produced energy in any large scale, and that was at Lorance in France in 1966. Now I have to say stuff about the march on the 29th and the COP. I would say, I made a list of positive things that we could take away, and if I could just quickly run them off. James Hansen's claim that bilateral talks will be positive and that we shouldn't over-focus on the march, on the Paris COP. And the important thing for all of us here who are involved in other campaigning organisations is that we there's been a huge surge in young people joining the climate movement. We had the two largest ever campaigning climate marches in British history in September and March this year. September last year, March this year. 40,000 estimated in September, which is by far and away one of the largest marches held in the capital. 20,000 estimated at the last one. So in November, there is a huge surge of youth activity, not least noticed in the Jeremy Corbyn campaign. And one of the most amazing things about the Jeremy Corbyn campaign is that last week, the figure touted was 60,000 people have joined the Labour Party since Jeremy Corbyn's victory in the leadership elections. So this is hugely encouraging.
Put an end now, sorry.
Okay. Please, we mustn't have. Sorry, if I could just say one more thing. We must not allow this enthusiasm from young people joining the climate movement to be dissipated in the way that it did after Copenhagen. We must find things that they can apply their energies to in a positive way. And one is most definitely TTIP. We must get them to campaign against TTIP. We will find attacks on the precautionary principle soon. We must defend the precautionary principle. And there are so many issues that we can keep positivity alive. And I'll just give a plug again for, as Steve did, for Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group publication. This is something positive to disseminate amongst campaigners and keeping that youth spirit alive. £2.50 funds go to Campaign Against Climate Change. I wish I could say a lot more.